I'm pleased to introduce Erin Fogg with Spoke Consulting. You could read her bio on the invitation that was sent out by our team earlier this week and late last week. Very worldly individual, as I read through it myself. Fun travels or life experiences, and probably left-leaning based on her affiliations with some political candidates. So that always plays fairly well with a nonprofit crowd. She was introduced to me by a common friend, Kevin Price, living out in California. And, as soon as they knew that we both worked in nonprofits, there was an introduction. We had a quick conversation and we decided we were going to be fast friends. So, from here, I'll let Erin talk about what she's going to talk about. Again, please throw things in the chat as you have comments or questions. This is meant to be interactive. So thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you, Nick. That was lovely. And yes, you're absolutely right. We spoke for a few minutes and we thought, oh, we just love what you're doing. And I just love what you're doing. It's really exciting always to gather a group like this of individuals who've really committed their time, their careers, and so much more, as we all know, to making the world a better place. So, I'd like to begin just by thanking all of you for the work that you do. You show up every day making really important shifts in our communities and for our communities. And for that, we are all very, very grateful. So as Nick mentioned, I've spent my career serving the community in various ways. I began, thinking I would go into diplomacy. I spent a lot of time learning about international policy, living abroad. I'm the daughter of an anthropologist, so we had lots of dinner time conversations about how people interact and how cultures are formed, and what all of this sort of means and how it comes together. And I think now, looking at the trajectory to date, I think that fed into a lot of what has brought me to where I am today. I started working with nonprofits about 20 years ago, and I'm so glad that I did. Nick mentioned my sort of early time in politics and policy. I actually got the PR bug working with my boss at the National Convention in 2004, and when our press secretary didn't show up. And they said, well, Erin, you can go get some interviews for your boss, right? And I said, well, yeah, sure, of course. I think I must have been 25 years old. I said, absolutely, I can do that. And I started knocking on doors and I started talking to reporters and, got him on all of these different shows and saw how the interviews happened. And I thought, my gosh, this is just interacting with people. This is just telling a story and activating people to come and participate in what we would like to share, and really having that sort of magic happen. And that was how I got into comms. Went from policy to communications just like that, just from an understanding that this is really just about humans interacting with other humans. So now I have a communications firm called Spoke Consulting. We work only with nonprofits and foundations, including some large educational institutions like Stanford University. We work with the Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society there. We help run events, which are essentially just an amalgamation of all things communications in one magical moment with a lot of people. And we do a lot of writing and thinking and interacting, not just with the nonprofits that we serve, but of course with the communities that they're looking to reach. So what I'd like to share today is really, it's our philosophy. It's the way that we approach communications, and the way that we try to invite our nonprofit family of clients and folks that we interact with, boards we serve on, communities we volunteer with, how we invite them to interact with the organizations and with the causes that really matter to them. Because ultimately what we do, we're so lucky in our line of work, is we invite people in to do something that's very, very meaningful, and frankly, life-changing in many cases for them. It's not just great for us. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about communicating like a human being. We spend a lot of time talking about the structures of communications. And really, when it comes down to it, what we believe at Spoke is that it's less about the structures and more about getting back to a place where we're understanding that we're just trying to make connections with people. So I'll do sort of a brief arc, and please absolutely put questions into the chat. I'd love to hear about sort of what perspective you're coming to this from, whether you have specific questions or whether something sparks a new idea or even an example you'd like to share, please feel free. This is all about being kind of interactive, as Nick mentioned. I'd like to talk to you about a few different things, beginning with just being human in your communications. And then we'll talk about sort of how to structure communications in a way that's much more intuitive than we've sort of learned to do in this modern structure, and really talk about how that can lead into creating a plan and measuring success in a more accurate way and a more sustainable way. And then, of course, lots of questions. Oh, so I say communicating like a human. What does that mean, right? I mean, obviously we all communicate, we talk. We're talking right now, or trying to. It is daylight savings, and I haven't had all that much coffee yet. I'm out in California, so it's a little early. But really, when it comes down to it, what we need most as human beings who are working to make our communities stronger, who are working to meet needs as we identify them, who are working to spark interest from volunteers and from donors, is a return to empathy and intuition. We spend a lot of time thinking, gosh, I need to get out a certain number of posts on social media, and I need to get out these emails on this specific time frame, and guy, we got to design this other thing, and make sure that we're using the perfect words. And the unfortunate outcome of that is that we really distance ourselves from the fact that what we're trying to do is virtually, in many cases, look someone in the eye and say, hey, I do this thing that's really meaningful to me, and I have on good authority somehow, right? Whether it's because you're connected with them through your community or you've been referred to them by somebody else, I have on good authority, you're probably interested in this too. And I'd really like to invite you to take part in that. So what we like to do at Spoke is try to encourage people to move away from this highly structured, professionalized communication system, move away a little bit, resist that strategic plan style communications, and get back to what's truly effective and sustainable, which is to communicate about things as they come up, as they're interesting. We talk a lot about letting the content drive the communications. We do not believe that there's any way for you to connect authentically with another individual if you're trying to reach out to them because it's the right day of the week at 10 a.m. when you were supposed to send that post out on Facebook. That's no way to say, hey, human being, I'd really like to invite you in, and here's why. Instead, we like to say, look, consider what you're trying to convey and why it's important for you to reach this person, and then decide to move forward with your communications. So before you begin any process of moving forward with a connection with an individual, any kind of communication project or campaign or whatever we want to call it, you really want to think about what you're trying to achieve. You want to think about a few different things. We like to work in threes because that's how human brains work. It makes it much easier to move forward. But you really want to think about your outcome, right? So when you're approaching anything from as small as a social media post or as big as planning a large event, you want to think about what you want that outcome to be. If we do this right, it's sort of akin to deciding, how to communicate your mission and your vision, right? If we do this right, what will the outcome be? How will people feel? What action will they want to take? And how will we then look forward to nurturing that relationships that we're beginning to form? You really want to think about whether this, might have some connection to your identity, right? So either you need to have an outcome you're looking for. You want to think about how this is going to build your organization's identity, your personality, the sort of individual, if you will, of who your organization is, and how you're building that connection with the people that you serve or the people who you want to invite to be part of your process. And you want to think about partnership, right? So if this is something that will build on partnerships you have or serve an existing relationship to grow it more, these are all really good reasons to communicate. If you can't identify any of these things, it's not the right time to communicate, and set it aside. No is really, really important. We are all stretched really thin. And in our communities, we're doing as much as we can all the time because we really, really believe and we know that we're making a difference for our communities. And part of going through this process of identifying why we're wanting to take these communications actions is also identifying when it's time to say, no, we're not actually going to do that. Right? You might say, we're not going to communicate on that social media platform anymore. It's not serving us. It's not going to meet the outcomes we're looking to achieve. We're going to set that aside and preserve some of that energy for something else. I was actually at a great conference last week up in Canada with a whole bunch of different philanthropists. And one of the presenters was really wonderful. She said, when we think about human beings, right, we have five fingers. She said, that means you can basically do 5 things. That's how many things you can hold. And when you think about what you really want to do well, you can probably do about 3 things. That's how many things we can really like think through and kind of be involved with and keep tracking. But really, if you want to go deep on something, you can only do one at a time. So think carefully about where you're putting that energy and that time and that care. Because what we really want to do is go deep in each of the things that we do and move from one thing to another and not multitask. Although I know sometimes we have to do that. So as we're thinking through what outcomes we want, we really want to look at the people that we're trying to impact, right? I don't like to use the word audience so much if I can help it, right? I don't want to talk about targeting them because ultimately we know that by engaging people in the kind of work that we do, it's good for them and for us. It's great for well-being, right? We need to remember that when we're reaching these people, we are also providing the opportunity for their lives to be enriched. So again, we've thought through now, hopefully, before we approach any communications task, we thought about our why we're doing this, what outcomes we want to see, how it will impact the way that our identity is evolving in the eyes of the people that we serve. We want to talk about how it's going to serve partnerships. We really need to talk about the people that we're looking to reach, not about where we find them and how we're going to get them to do what we want them to do, but thinking about what value we provide. What about the the ideas or the opportunities we're presenting to them will be of value to them. When you're communicating with someone and asking them, inviting them in to what you're doing, you're really asking them to share with you the most important thing that they will ever have in their lives, and that's their time and their attention. Even if it's spending 20 minutes reading your e-newsletter, or hopefully maybe more like 10 or 15, right? We don't want to go too long on those. We want to keep them bite-sized, right? Even if it's scrolling by and pausing to notice a photograph that you've shared on Instagram with a post, those are moments in their lives that they're never going to get back. So just as important as it is for us to consider, gosh, where are we putting this energy? How are we doing this? It's important for us to consider whether what we're putting out there is worth our people's time. Because if it doesn't meet that litmus, if we can't say definitively, absolutely, this is worth a moment from someone who cares about my organization, set it aside, don't do it. Because people can tell. Right. So one of the other issues with this sort of, structured professionalization of communications is that it pushes us to a place where we're just sort of pushing out slop and not just the AI kind, right? What we're doing, what we really want to move to is pushing out communications that authentically connect with our people that we're excited about, that share our joy. Communication should be the best part of your day, not a burden. Because what communications is doing is it's giving you the opportunity to share what your life's work is all about. It's about sharing the outcomes that you're achieving. It's about sharing the work that you do every day. And it's about sharing sometimes the mistakes or the pitfalls or the things that are hard or sticky that you really need help getting through and inviting other people in. And if you stick to that, if you really think about that with your people, you want to think about what value you're providing them. You want to think about what role you're inviting them to play, right? How are we going to interact together? How are we going to do this? And you want to think about how you're building that relationship out with every communication you're making. Now, all of this is sounding a little bit like a lot of pressure, right? If I'm saying every social media post, you got to think about these things. But ultimately, what I'm trying to promote for all of you is releasing yourself from feeling like you need to push things through and instead thinking about how each of your movements in the communications realm is going to move your purpose forward and create a process that actually feels much more intuitive and easy and authentic to manage. So I talk about all these things, right? We're being human, we're finding our why, we're thinking about who our people are and what we're going to achieve. So obviously, we also need a process to get this stuff done. Right? We're working with a lot of different tools now, and ultimately, with most of the clients that we work with, we're working with a limited access to some of the tools. Often, we're working with multiple hats on. So, as we're trying to provide communication support for these organizations that we work with, we're also maybe doing admin, maybe we're also operations. We could be a volunteer coordinator. We might also be trying to manage development and do fundraising planning, right? So communications needs to fit into the flow of all of these other things. The way we look at it at Spoke, communications really isn't a separate entity. It is instead part of the flow of all of the other things that we do as organizations and as individuals for our communities. So we like to look at this process as integrating communications as sort of a spark of joy in every other department. right? So your volunteer coordinators, they're very, very important to your communications process. They're probably your first ambassadors to many of the folks who may later become your donors, or they might even be recipients of your services. Many, many folks take on different roles with an organization throughout the flow of their connection with you, right? If you think about your front desk folks, your admin person who might greet people at the front desk, they're also an incredible ambassador. They are one of your frontline communicators. They're answering the phone. They're providing people a little window into who you are as an organization. So engaging everyone in your organization in your communications process and really making sure that they're empowered to understand how to articulate your mission and how to convey to others what you're trying to achieve is really important. So spread that out. Share the comms across everyone, while of course having a few people who are in charge of trying to manage all of these modern day tools that we use, right? So when we're talking about comms, now for most organizations, large and small, really we're all using about five primary channels, right? So we spend a lot of our time, like it or not, on social media. It can become a very important medium, particularly because of, for better or for worse, the way that social media has really brilliantly tapped into our evolved psychology around the way that we open up to people. So one of the reasons social media is so addictive, as they say, right, that draws us in so well, or it has in the past, it's waning a little bit with all the ads and changed algorithms, right? But the reason it works so well is it really convinces us as human beings that we're in a safe space with other human beings with whom we have relationships. So social media can be really important for nonprofits in that it is a place, it's a zone, a room, if you will, where you can imagine that you're actually connecting with other human beings that you assume to already be part of your social network, right? So when we think about walking into a room, right, we walk in, first thing we do is scan to see if we know anybody, right? And then we gravitate toward folks with whom we may have some prior connection. That feels like a safe zone. Part of the reason that's the case is because we're looking for that safety, right? We're looking for folks we know, oh, I know that person, right? There, I can trust them in some way. They might then introduce you to someone else. You're immediately more likely to feel an affinity for that person and to assume credibility if you've already got another social connection, right? Social media brings that into the digital realm. It works really well because we feel like we're in that room with other people, with family, with friends, with old colleagues, right? It taps into all those mechanisms that tell us, oh, trust this place and trust these people because you've got a lot of your folks around you. That's why in social media, the ads work really well, right? We're much more likely to click that ad as we're going through Instagram because we saw it right next to a post from our grandma, right? Or from our cousins or from our best friend. So that's something that nonprofits need to be, I think, more aware of and more willing to embrace in terms of using things like social media. But it's not just social media. We talk about traditional media there again. We're working with evolved psychology in terms of the way that traditional media can have an impact on our communities. So traditional media is so important to nonprofits because what it does is it provides what's called third-party validation. Anytime you're mentioned in the local paper, anytime your organization comes up on the local news, that is an indication to your volunteers, to your donors, to the people who might need your services, that you are credible, that you're trustworthy. Because if that's not coming from you, you're not the one saying, oh, of course, we're the best, we're great, right? It's some other trusted source that's saying, no, truly, we have proof this organization is important and is trustworthy and is worthy of your time. So with traditional media, that's a really important, again, just intuitive, authentic connection that you're making with people seen through these more modern systems. Okay? Same with email, website, and in-person events. The same approach really applies to all of these different channels and the way that we move through them over time. So we've talked now about authenticity and identifying our people, right? We've talked about knowing why we're approaching communications the way we are. Um, But the big sort of elephant in the room for most nonprofits is planning, right? How do we make sure that we're hitting certain points? How do we make sure that we're moving through the process, of bringing communications through in all of our work without burning our people out? I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to folks, bringing, organizations on board, or just providing coaching, right? We try to do our best to give away as much of our knowledge as we can at Spoke, so that we're empowering our clients and our nonprofit communities to really move forward with comms. And the question is really always, well, but how do we plan it? What kind of spreadsheet are we going to use, right? What kind of schedule should we be sticking to, right? When we approach social media, how many posts per week do we want, right? How many emails per month do we want to send out? What we really want to do, I think, is take a breath, and think not about what numbers we're trying to hit, but instead about what kind of cadence of communication do we want to have. So, when we think about our communications as charitable organizations, as community organizations, the goal really isn't to hit certain numerical values in the way that we communicate, but instead to develop a cadence of communication that feels comfortable, and that invites our people to understand that there's a predictable process through which they'll be able to stay tapped into what we do. And primarily because we never, again, want to be communicating just to communicate. We want to communicate because we have something to say. So at Spoke, what we look at is identifying these different pieces, right? Your why, your people, and your process, right? So anytime someone comes to you and says, what we should do is, right? Or I have this idea for a new communications campaign, pause and think about these different pieces, right? Your why, your people, and your process. Why are we doing this? What are we looking to achieve? Which people are we trying to reach and where are they? And then identify the process that you're going to use moving forward. And typically you want that process to really fit more into the sort of regular ebb and flow of the other work that you're doing, versus sort of placing another set of schedules on top of the programming and the work that you're putting out there. So the way that we think about this often is, again, the sort of content driving the communications piece, right? So, if you're an organization that has, say, daily volunteer events, you definitely don't want to send only a monthly newsletter to folks. They would miss out on a lot of the effort and the opportunity that you're offering every day. You might be an organization that wants to send weekly emails out to your people, dictated by the schedule of those volunteer events that you're offering up as opportunities for them to take part in your work. If you're an organization that's constantly out in the field, say you're running a community garden and it's springtime and there's just beautiful new things happening in the garden all the time, you don't want to just post to social media once a week and miss out on all these beautiful opportunities to share what's happening in the garden, who's volunteering, where they're going. You might be posting daily. You might tell people all about, how the flowers are, or the vegetables are sprouting, and what kinds of volunteers are there, and how we're moving through things, or how we're getting, distributing produce. If you, on the other hand, are an advocacy organization where most of your work is, frankly, not really social media worthy, and maybe not something you're even allowed to post publicly, right? You don't want to push yourself to be posting to social media every day. You want to allow yourself the opportunity to identify those times when it really makes sense to put the word out and have those conversations. So, as an advocacy organization, you might be a once a month newsletter group, and you might post to social media a couple times a week max. Thinking really about what you're trying to achieve with those communications actions, not about a calendar that you're putting together. Um, and as we go through this process, right, of course, and I'm going to slow down just a little bit here because I'm realizing, it's early in the morning and I'm having my coffee. I'm talking fast. So I'm hoping that I'm still bringing everybody along with me. I'm inviting you along as I'm encouraging you to do. And B, I'd love to make sure that I'm tapping into folks. So I'm talking a lot about the sort of staff perspective, right, of individuals who are working for nonprofits. But I hope it's clear as well that a lot of what I'm sharing here is also really important for your board members to understand, or if you are a board member, or a volunteer leader in this kind of process, everything that we've just talked through in terms of the way that we work to make connections with our people. All of this should also be something that we're connecting with in terms of our different roles with the organization, right? So, if you're a board member, absolutely make sure that you're playing a part in how all of these things go forward. Talk to your staff about what needs to be communicated. Give yourself the opportunity to play an active role. It looks like, speaking to how accounting finance folks can use this to shape their communications. Oh, that's a really interesting question. Okay. So So, and I'm assuming that we're talking, asking about accounting finance folks shaping their communications externally. So we can kind of dig into that a little bit because a lot of this, has an implication for internal communications as well. Um, but what I would say is, if we're talking about, so accounting finance folks may be talking about budgets, or fundraising for nonprofits. I think a lot of this has to do with shaping our conversations, about money and about budgeting, in such a way that we're really connecting with the folks that we're talking to. So you sort of imagining yourself, let's use the Thanksgiving example because everybody loves that, right? We sit down at Thanksgiving, you're going to be with a lot of family and some friends that you may or may not be on the same page with, right? Um, the best way to come to a point where you're having a conversation with someone that really connects, is to remember that they are also a human being who is trying to approach sort of whatever topic you're getting into, just like you're trying to approach it, right? So if you're an accounting or finance person who's looking to communicate about what your organization does or about what's happening with your budget or where you need support, right? Where we need additional, say, additional budget to move into, you want to look to the other person and assume that they also want the same thing, right? So don't be afraid to actually ask them questions and connect with where they are as a human being, and then translate what you're trying to get into terms that actually work for both of you, right? Assume that you're looking to reach the same goal. And I want you to actually maybe elaborate a little bit more on that question because I think there's probably more that we can dig into. Here we go. Let's see if I can I don't actually multitask well at all. So you hear me pausing while I read and then come back to this. I shift task well. I don't multitask. Internal communication can be just as important. That right, program directors. Well, so and this is what's really interesting. So I think, my perspective is that we all need to get a lot more relaxed about talking about financials, particularly when it comes to nonprofits. We need to be more open about our budget. We need to be more open about our needs. Frankly, when it comes to fundraising, the most effective way to get the support you need is to ask for the support you need. And we're all afraid to do that. Particularly in American culture, we get very uncomfortable about talking about money. We worry that if we identify exactly what that funding gap is, or how much we need to, to bring in to achieve the goals we're looking for, we worry that somehow we'll overwhelm people, or we'll make them uncomfortable, or they'll think that they don't have enough money to give us, or they'll think we're asking for too much. All of this is really ineffective because all of that worrying doesn't actually get us anywhere. While as having the conversations with folks, the likelihood that you're going to alienate someone by saying, hey, we're trying to achieve this and here's where the gap is, the likelihood you're going to alienate them is very low. But the likelihood that you're going to get the money you need, if you don't mention that, is 100%. The only way that we definitely fail is by not being open to communicating about it. So it's interesting. Yes, program directors' eyes will generally glaze when we talk about finances. But I think the way to get over that, is sort of once again sort of the same concept as bringing everyone into your communications process. If we bring everyone into the process of understanding their financials, their budgets, and having the conversation about how those connect to program delivery, it's a great way to unglaze those eyes, right? So, if we can find a place where we're more candidly having conversations about the way our fundraising and development and budgeting drives the impact that people are seeing on the ground, that can get very exciting. And actually including people in development and in fundraising campaigns, can be really empowering for your staff, just as communications can be really empowering if, sort of democratized, within the organization. And a lot of that goes back to, what's on the screen right now, right? So, even in talking about your financials, right? So think about why you're wanting to communicate with we'll use the programming person example, right? Um, People's eyes are unlikely to glaze if you know why you're talking to them, right? If you're coming to the conversation saying, I'm hoping, right? In your head, I'm going to come to this conversation because I'm hoping by having this conversation about our budgets, um, I'm going to help this programming person better understand and be better empowered to achieve what they're trying to achieve using the funds, right? Using the mojo that we have, right? You think about who this person is, right? What do you know about them? How much experience do they have with budgeting already, right? Or whatever other topic we're talking about, right? You think about how you're going to connect with them. Is this someone who's going to do better talking about these things over a Zoom? Are they, how have you observed them, interacting before? They might be a texter. Don't call them if they're a texter. Everybody knows, millennials in particular, don't pick up the phone, right? Text me first and tell me what you need to talk to me about. I'll be much more comfortable. um, and then think about, when you're having these conversations and how it's happening, what you're trying to achieve and over what timeline. Internal or external, the same set of sort of integrated, intuitive rules still rule our communications wherever we're having those conversations. Now, what we can't do quite as well when we're communicating internally as externally is measure our results. So, in our modern system of communications, we spend a lot of time using digital tools to try to reach the people we're working to connect with. The upside of that is that we can really see what kind of impact we're having. Um, and advertising used to be, say, primarily print or some television. It was really difficult to know exactly how much impact your print ad was having. You could say, well, I know it's in the really prime spot. It's in the bottom right corner, right below the fold of the front page of the paper. I'm paying extra to get it there. I know there are this many people reading the paper, so I'm going to guess that, some percentage of those people are seeing my ad. Unless people were taking action and actually saying, hey, I saw your ad in the newspaper. Here's $5. It was really hard to tell how that was connecting. Now we use tools where we can literally see when people saw it, where they saw it, whether they clicked on it, if they clicked on it, did they click through? If they clicked through, did they give us a donation? We can see the arc of impact from each one of our touches with people. Same with email communications, right? By and large, we don't, thank goodness, regulations changed. We can't see exactly who's doing what all the time. But if we're functioning within the universe of our lists of people, we can see whether people are opening up our emails. We can see what they're clicking on if they're moving through that, right? We can really do a pretty good job of seeing what kind of impact that we're having. The one pitfall for the nonprofit community is that we often fail to measure the actual engagement of our communities, and instead we lean into looking for numbers. So along the same vein of returning to a place where we're communicating with empathy and authenticity, we also really want to move to a place where we're not looking to build our audience per se. We don't want a bajillion Facebook followers. We want a few Facebook followers who actually read every post and click through and then donate, right? We don't want email lists that are reams and reams and reams of individuals with whom we don't have an authentic connection, who don't really care about our work, but they're just a number on a page. We want a more limited universe of individuals who always open up that email and always look for an opportunity to volunteer this week, right? Or forward on our content to their communities and say, this is really important. Look at the impact that this organization is having. Um, right? We want to host events where we don't just have a whole bunch of folks filter through, but where we have people come to our events and authentically celebrate the work that we're doing and leave motivated to volunteer or to give, or to make sure that other individuals who need what we are offering are able to access that, right? So as we're looking to measure, and if you're interested, we can talk a little bit more about the tools that you can use. So, this is sort of beginning here with a larger arc of exactly, sort of how we suggest you approach communications in general. But happy, depending on where people are in this room and what you're interested in, to talk a little bit more specifically about what tools you can use to do this. Some free, some paid. We're big advocates for investing in a few tools that will really be more holistically supportive of your communications. But in measuring your success, and particularly when it comes to some of these primary digital platforms that you're using, you don't have to pay to be able to look and see who opened your email most. Or to look at your metrics and see who forwarded on your email, because that's a real, when we talk about the sort of the spectrum of different ways that people interact with your communications, and how you can see that interaction happening, there are very different levels of engagement that you can look for, right? So, as you're building out your ability to communicate with people, you can look first for folks to for impressions, right? So just hoping to have eyeballs on what you're putting out there. The next step up is that someone, likes your stuff, right? They somehow click to show their affinity, to show their appreciation for what you're doing. That didn't get in front of other people, but it did indicate that that person just tightened their bond with you just a little bit, right? The next level up is sharing, and this works for just about anything, right? So this works in person with someone wanting to introduce you to someone else they know. This works, in evaluating your social media, right? Every time someone clicks that little paper airplane icon, that's a big win, right? Because if they're willing to use a little bit of their social credibility, right, their social capital, if you will, to share what you've put out there, that's a big marker of affinity, right? Now you've really gotten them close. They're right inside your network. They've now decided to sort of assume some of that relationship with you, and now they're really ready to communicate further. Right. And that's true with emails as well, right? Forward to a friend used to be a link that was used quite a bit. Now we usually just use the forward button, right? But each of those interactions, those physical manifestations of their relationship and their affinity for you, are really important. So, when we talk about the sort of in-person stuff, the anecdotal evidence, always listen to your community. People are wonderful about responding to emails that they really like and saying, "Guy, that was great, good job." Right? Don't discount that. I know it's a focus group of one, but it's important. And people, most of the time, if they're giving you positive feedback, there are lots and lots of other people with positive feedback who are behind them who just didn't take the moment to step out and say it. So anecdotal evidence is important when it comes to communications. When you're looking at the different ways to weight the way that you measure your success, you want to look at your comparative worth and your growth over time, right? So not just how did this go today, right? But how has this grown over time, and what kinds of different measurements are we using to understand our success? And then, one of the most underrated opportunities in the nonprofit world is looking for those testimonials and direct feedback from folks, right? So this goes back to the beginning of what I was talking about when I shared the concept that based on our evolved psychology of looking for validation from other folks, really understanding from the perspective of another human being how they feel about your organization will sway your people much more quickly than you just saying, "You were great, you should listen to what we're saying." So, always looking for those testimonials and for the budget impact. So that's really the full arc of the philosophy that we bring at Spoke to our communications. Um, Again, returning to the idea that communication should be addressed with empathy and intuition to get us back to a more authentic process for really getting to where we want to be in terms of our relationships with real people. Um, so I'd like to open it up now if you're game. I know it's early in the morning for some of us, not as early for others. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from anybody who's interested in sort of stepping in and stepping up and has specific questions about communications, specific pain points that you're looking to solve for, or even specific members of your community that you're looking to engage. Right. So we talk a lot in my line of work about how to engage board members, right? Or how to engage leadership staff, or how to engage younger staff. And we have the whole spectrum of different kinds of communications approaches. Um, and it looks like here, so Nick, thank you for the question about the preferred platform in terms of measurement. So that's a really good question. We actually use, so we're firm believers, having spent many, many years, decades in this line of work, in tools that begin very focused and stay that way. So we always recommend for our clients email platforms that are just that focus on email and remain true to that. So we use MailChimp for most of our clients' email communications. Their analytics they used to be better. They sort of, everything kind of goes in ups and downs, right? They'll be great and then they'll falter a little bit, but then they come back up and they get a little better. Unfortunately, with MailChimp at the lower level accounts, they don't have great analytics. You can't always get a sense of your sort of click-through rates, right? So that's one of the most important things to look at in terms of trying to determine whether you're providing value and whether you're providing your readership with an appropriate and understandable call to action. Right. So, don't assume just because you're not seeing clicks that people are not engaged. um, think first about whether you've actually directed them to your links so that they know that they should click through. And then, after that, if you're really sure that you gave them a really strong call to action and they still didn't click through, then start thinking about whether you're providing the appropriate information that will pull them in and help them to understand what you're wanting them to do in response to your communications. For social media, we moved, gosh, maybe 8 years ago, to Sprout Social, which we now provide to all of our clients just as part of our onboarding process. We have found over the years, and this goes back to Spoke's founding concept, was that for too many nonprofits, they're stretched in too many different directions. So communications sort of fall by the wayside, and communications tools are very rarely budgeted for. So one of our founding principles was to try to provide a hub, a space that would provide relief to nonprofits who are in that situation, where you can not only get all of the communication support you need, but where you also have access to the tools that can support your success. And so that's where we started to invest in Sprout Social as a platform, not only to manage social media. So for those who aren't familiar with Sprout Social, it's sort of a full service social media management platform. You can essentially sort of hook in all of your different social accounts into Sprout, and do most of even your posting and even scheduling, and your analysis from within the platform. So again, the reason that we decided to invest in that for our clients is because it provides a much more robust opportunity to manage your social media in a way that is, use the word again, intuitive and authentic, right? It feels more, rather than sort of moving to all of these different platforms where you're trying to work within their different systems, you don't have as much control over, who can participate with you in the process of posting to social media. Sprout provides that opportunity to actually get in and co-manage with other team members. And then it does a really beautiful job of bringing together your analytics. So you can do sort of snapshot looks at your various profiles. You can see your audience growth over time, which again is not a recommended litmus. It's not a great way to know whether you're doing well at social media, but you can see that audience growth. More importantly, you can see the number of impressions that you have. So that's the number of eyeballs that are just on your content over a period of time. You can see the number of engagements, meaning your likes and shares over time. You can see your numbers of click-throughs, right, from posts to other platforms. So that's a really nice way to get a more holistic sense of what's working for you. Equally important, these kinds of analyses, right, looking at this kind of analytics can be an important way for you to understand where your energy is being put to good use, right? So uh, you may find over time that, for instance, many folks in our community, they've moved away from X entirely because it was not serving their organization. It no longer fit what was happening on the ground with their communities, right? And they were putting energy into this platform that was not giving enough back. Right. So, we have most of our folks now are primarily putting their energy in social media into, actually, LinkedIn is our fastest growing platform now. And part of the reason for that is that LinkedIn provides for our, charitable community, a really comfortable venue where you can get more in-depth information. Right. So in the nonprofit world, we love to talk a lot, right? Really, really like to give in-depth snapshots that are 10 pages long of the work that we're doing, right? We like to be able to provide the opportunity to click through, which of course Instagram does not provide. And we like the opportunity to be able to connect and find mutual sort of partnerships, right? So LinkedIn provides a really nice space to be able to interact with other professionals in the same zone. We also at Spoke, we use Critical Mention, although we've also used Meltwater and other platforms over time to track traditional media. So that can be really important in the nonprofit world, particularly if you are a larger organization or an organization that's very well ensconced in your community. Using one of these tools that provides a sort of overall media observation and analysis can be really important, and it can also drive your other communications. So, we use these media scanning platforms to receive a digest every morning with the any kind of mentions on actually social media and traditional media for any of our client names. We make sure that we're searching board member names, significant donors. We have some clients who even use these media scanning platforms to make sure that they're tracking. Gosh, as terrible as it sounds, but I'm sure I have some development folks out there tracking obituaries as well. So to be able to make sure that we know when an important member of our community or a major donor, or even someone who is a legacy donor who will be identifying our organizations when they pass. To know when that happens. So these analytical platforms, these analyses can be really important for lots and lots of different touches. Let's look to other questions. Anybody out there? I know you've got pain points. I know we all talk about this a lot.
Erin, what's a first step that, any nonprofit should take just to improve that, take that first step toward improving their overall communication to the outside world, if you will?
Oh, good question, Nick. Truly, the first step is to stop second guessing yourself. Identify a structure by which you know who has responsibility for your communications in your organization and who has authority, right? So you have a really clear sense of who needs to approve things before they go out. Once you know that, move forward, right? So one of the most significant limits that we see our nonprofit communities imposing on themselves has to do with the constant concern that we're going to say the wrong thing, or we're going to say it at the wrong time, or we're going to alienate somebody. So we just don't do anything. Right? I can't tell you how many times we've had conversations with folks where it's like, God, we just can't get an e-newsletter out because, first we need to vet all of the ideas we're going to share with, our leadership, and then we need to write everything up, and then somebody needs to read through all of it again, and then we need to, have another person to double check it, and then we get it all put together, and it's got to go to the CEO, and the CEO has to read through it, but then after the CEO reads through it, we actually send it to our CFO because they're a really good proofer, and so we just want to make sure they get one more set of eyes on it. It's like every newsletter takes 5 months. Right? We, as a community, need to do less worrying about stepping on someone's toes and more authentically conveying what's happening within our organizations and within our communities of service. Because we are absolutely guaranteed to fail at communications if we never get anything out the door. And I mentioned emails as the example, and I saw some smiles. This is everybody's familiar with that process, right? But it's not just that. I mean, my gosh, annual reports are incredibly important. Whether your annual report is a single page to give your donors a snapshot into how you're progressing as an organization, or whether it's an entire book, with lists of donors and all these things. We have to be able to get those out the door. We cannot let them get stuck, as they so often do, right? There's always who's going to write the letter? It's got to be a letter from the board chair, but then the letter from the board chair maybe should be co-authored with the CEO. And then who do we have double check that? And whose voice do we write it in, right? How much do we share of our financials? Do we really want to be completely transparent and share everything? Or should we maybe just try to create a pie chart? We're not really sure. The more we cycle on these things, the more quickly we are defeating ourselves and eliminating our own opportunity to form relationships with folks. And truly, the number of folks who are going to leave your community because they didn't like that Facebook post that you put together, or you used the wrong word at the wrong time on Instagram, is nil. No one's leaving, but you might make a connection with somebody who happens to see your post when they need it, right? Or happens to realize that, gosh, they didn't know that you provided those kinds of services, and it's exactly what someone in their community or their family is looking for, and they make that move to become involved. So I'd say the quickest thing to do is get out of your own way and move forward. The other thing,
Yeah.
though, the second thing is to get photographers into your community. There's nothing that will improve your communications faster than making sure that you're prioritizing imagery. We live in a world of words and images. You're going to write all the time, no matter who you are, whether you want to or not, whether you think you're good at it or not, you're going to be writing all the time. And you're going to need to have images that go with that writing to really make that connection. The number of folks who second guess and hesitate to spend money on a photographer is just mind blowing. It's really all of us in this community. And the return on investment from paying an individual a little bit of money up front to make sure that you have beautiful images that can really invite people in to your stories is incredible.
I just wanted to go back to one thing that you did say
Mm,
early in that bit about getting out of your own way was the delegation piece coming from somebody who doesn't do the best at that himself, like identifying who can be responsible for it. Just speaking to all of those nonprofit executive directors who wear a lot of hats and
right,
find that person, whether it's a volunteer that you trust, whether it's a board member, whether it's a hired position, like
right.
in order for things to happen, it can't always be you.
That's right. Here, Nick. I love that. And I'll add to that. Um, as you're considering how to delegate, give yourself a little bit of time, sort of like everything else we talked about here, right? Pause for a moment and think about what you're going to be asking that person to do and um, what strengths you're really looking for. And I say that because you might be surprised when you actually sit down and think, what would make this person a great spokesperson, is the way you should think about this. Anyone you delegate communications authority to, they are now a spokesperson for your organization. You are inviting them to speak for you, right? Do not tap the youngest person in the office and say, I bet you know how to do social media. You should do it for us because you're young and you know how to navigate those platforms. If you wouldn't have that person stand up on a stage with a microphone and riff about your organization, do not give them the keys to your digital communications tools. So really be thoughtful about delegating to someone who you trust, who has the experience and the grounding in your goals, your mission, your vision. Um, to speak, with authority, if you will, for the organization, and for that person to be equipped to manage interactions. Right? So don't fall into the trap of identifying the person that can use the tool best. Always prioritize the person who will be able to speak most appropriately for your organization. They can learn the tools. There are lots and lots and lots of free opportunities out there. We talk about TechSoup and other organizations out there that are specifically available to nonprofits. They provide free or very low cost webinars and tutorials. There are lots of folks that you can often find through your community organization or community foundations and other local support organizations who will be more than happy to help train someone in the actual use of the tools. Identify your storytellers and the people you can really trust to hold your organization close. Right.
All
Um,
right. Well, maybe we've got others who are feeling the effects of daylight savings time or not enough coffee at this morning. A
yes.
little bit of a quieter group, but I just myself as a firm business owner, like read everything that you've just gone through and think like there are things that I need to do on our social media. We do a great job promoting our clients. And the nonprofit community and as a whole, we could do a little bit more, just maybe tooting our own horn a smidge, but just doing it with enthusiasm, doing it, getting out of our own way. You said so many things um, that I'm going to take away myself for just our business. We did just have one more item come in the chat, wondering about the impact of an annual report come out as a year later and be amazing versus having something sooner and less amazing.
Sooner and less amazing. Period. Always. Right.
Yeah.
So most of communications has more to do with people feeling immediately included in your work and understanding how they can become involved than it does with impressing someone, right? So while of course, I mean, my gosh, I mean, I have two graphic designers on staff. We love a beautiful annual report, right? We love a beautiful anything, your slides,
Mhm.
your socials, your everything, right? So we'd love everybody to have perfect photography and, eloquently written content and, all of the things.
Mhm.
But the reality is for most folks, they just need to be included in a timely way, right? So we talk a lot about the fact that, people are much more likely to pick up and move and do what you need them to do when you're communicating consistently. You're communicating based on when you have things to share, and you're communicating with a very clear call to action. All of those things are in the now. They are not. They don't get better if you let them bake, right? So I would say absolutely always try to get it out sooner. Now that said, don't pull the plug just because you feel like it's late. We often, in our sector, I often look at our communications tasks and think, oh no, it's just I'm so behind now. Maybe I just shouldn't do it, or gosh, we didn't, hit this timeline that we thought we were going to hit. So I guess maybe we should just pull the plug. Don't do that. Your people are not sitting there waiting, thinking, well, now that it's coming a week later, I'm just not sure that I'm going to donate, right? They're as far as they know, this was the plan, right? This is when you were going to send it anyway. So please don't hesitate to let the content drive the comms, right? If you have something to share, make sure you do it. The more timely, the better. If things run a little bit late, that's okay. Give yourself a little grace, get it out there. Chances are your folks won't even notice that it was on a different date than usual, or your monthly newsletter came out, 3 days after the end of the month. That's okay. Give yourself grace. Um, oh yes, and the photographer thing. My gosh, please. It will be an investment that absolutely pays back incredibly. Really, really important in everything you do. I mean, this is, use those photographs on social media and emails, in donor levels. My gosh, if you're sending out appeal letters, adding a few photographs to actually invite people in and help them to see and really feel what you're inviting them to support. Photographs make all the difference. Right.
Aaron, this has been great. I think when we talked, you're willing to chat with any nonprofit for a,
Absolutely.
an introductory conversation to see if there's a way that you can help. So I would encourage any and all of you on the call today to make that call or reach out via email to Aaron. Um, you know, again, this is great. We sometimes, being a accounting firm, we talk sometimes about business east. This is business stuff too, but like this is more of the softer side of
Yeah.
the nonprofit operational stuff that, is still very, very important. And so I'm glad that we could use your expertise today for our community.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Ella and Becca, for all your work putting this on. I'm so pleased that you provide this opportunity for the nonprofit community. And as Nick said, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to talk to anyone. We're happy to share our ideas. We do the work we do because we believe in you. And so, any opportunity we have to invest further in our nonprofit sector, nationwide, global, we're happy to do that. So please, and go out and communicate. Go talk to people. However you need to do that, let it flow.
Awesome. Last housekeeping matters here for us. Chris Ackley from American Red Cross, you are our Amazon gift card winner, so you can watch for that via email. Our next breakfast with Ann, last for this cycle, is on May 12th. Kristen Rosinski from our team is going to gather up a few funders and have a little bit of a roundtable conversation. That should be beneficial for any nonprofit to hear how funders look at you and I haven't, she's the content's developing or evolving, so we'll have a little bit more details prior to it being finalized, but mark your calendars for May 12th for the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Right on.